Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. We are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. We're dedicated to building a tribe of servant leaders, supporting one another through life's challenges, and empowering each other to move forward with strength and purpose. Our weekly groups and stories remind us that no one heals alone. Today, we welcome our guest storyteller, Kimberly Artley. We're going to have our special host, Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Duncan, who is going to be facilitating this talk today. So, a little bit about Kimberly Artley, who is the author of My Dog, My Buddha, and founder of PackFit. Described as the Mary Poppins of dog training, Kimberly's comprehensive background of human and canine nutrition, psychology, communication, and behavior all blend seamlessly together to create behavioral magic. Her signature whole, in quotations, dog, and then whole scenario, industrialized and tailored approach effectively speaks to a wide spectrum of canine challenges. A lifelong animal lover, it was her trials, challenges, and experiences that inspired a shift in her mindset. Loving dogs as we want to love them is one thing, but loving them as they need us to love them is another. PackFit was inspired by a very special dog named Lobo. Unfortunately, his story is an all too common one, which is why this work exists today, to prevent our story from repeating itself. Kimberly has worked with countless dogs and varying behavioral concerns, challenges, and question marks over the years, and has also worked alongside some of the greats in different shades of the industry. Her unique, unconventional approach is often described as completely transformative and absolutely life-changing. It's Kimberly's heartfelt mission to redefine what dog training means. Obedience training and behavioral training are two very different types of training with different aspects of the dog and equation being spoken to, and both are needed. So you can learn more about Kimberly's books and her mission here at it's www.packfit.net. So Scott, I'm going to hand it over to you. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful rendition there and bringing Kimberly on to the Bauer story. And with that, welcome aboard, Kimberly.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you. So, with that said, I'm going to just briefly talk to a few points here. Some of it might be a little repetitive, but
Okay.
Kimberly is the founder of PackFit. It's a dog training and behavioral company. It was born in Washington, D.C., but is now here based in Southern California, which isn't where she is really not too far from where I am. So that's kind of cool. There's more to the story there. But she's also, as mentioned by Sarah, she's an acclaimed international celebrated author. She's got books, My Dog, My Buddha, My Dog, My Buddha, the sequel. And then there's a highly anticipated upcoming release, and I'll do a drum roll here. The Human End of the Leash. So, folks will be excited to see that as well. Now, Kimberly has a number of other books. She, again, is an author. So towards the end of the interview, we're going to go and take a look at her website, which is, I love her website. I was in the pregame here today. We were chatting about her website. It's so well done, very artfully done. So you'll get a chance to see that again towards the end of the interview. And the folks that are part of making that website a nice website have done a great job. So, and then also just kind of an admin note here for folks that will be seeing this as it's recorded. once we're finished with the interview, what we do is we take the recording and we post it to the Power Story YouTube channel. And we put information into the description. We'll put the website, and then Kimberly may have some other stuff that she wants you to know. We'll have that there as well. And then we will also post the interview, the link to the interview on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So we'll get it out there for a lot of folks to see. So that's a good thing. So before we jump into the interview, Kimberly, I want to give you a quick chance just to give us a brief background of yourself, education, previous professions, interests, hobbies, just to kind of personalize and warm things up here a bit for folks to get to know you before we jump in and go through our interview here. So,
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be chatting with you all, and um, I love your mission and everything, that just all the support that you all are giving people. So I'm really pleased to be a part of that. Um, let's see a little bit about me. I grew up for the most part in DC, spent the majority of my life there. Had a quick little stint in New Orleans for about 6 years when I was younger, and for a couple years in a very small town in Mississippi when my grandmother was ill. But pretty much spent my entire life in DC. Uh, I've dabbled in a number of things over the years. Right out of high school, I tried college. It wasn't a good fit for me at the time. I went and completed cosmetology school, so I was doing hair for a little bit. Um, that that was it was a lot of that wasn't really my scene. After, we'll just say that, for after a few years, I loved the creative aspect of it. I loved meeting and connecting with people. But I couldn't seem to find a space where I felt really comfortable. So I ended up, I was working in the restaurant after that, and I was doing event planning, and I was singing in a band, and we were traveling up and down the Southeast coast, and had signed on with Hootie and the Blowfish's tour manager at one point, and I was co-writing a lot of songs, and it seems like an entire lifetime ago, but that was a great deal of fun. Um, let's see. After that, I I went back to school with a focus on health and nutrition. I had during around the restaurant and the band time, I was also struggling with some health stuff, and ended up experiencing a number of eating disorders, which I ended up putting myself in the hospital to get treatment for. Nobody really knew what I was going through at the time, and it's very typical that people are pretty secretive. There's a lot of shame involved when it comes to eating disorders, and I really don't like calling it a disorder. I would much prefer call it a response. I don't think disorders are actual disorders for the most part. They're more of a response to things. So you and I had talked about, and this is kind of going down another tangent, but when you and I last met, Scott, we were talking about how no one really is exempt from experiencing trauma. I mean, it's just part of the human experience. And at the time, there were all these things that were coming up for me. I didn't know what direction I was going in my life. I didn't know, I had this one school of thought over here that was saying, you need to be doing this at your age, you need to be doing that, you need to be blah, blah, blah. And on the other hand, I just, nothing felt right. And I just felt like I was in this continual state of seeking and searching, but I really didn't understand what that necessarily meant or what it was for. And I felt very out of control. So what a lot of people don't understand about eating responses disorders/responses is that when you feel so out of control in your life, that's like the one area in your life you can have some sort of control over. And people tend to use food to either stuff down what they don't want to feel or starve themselves of what they don't want to feel. So food kind of becomes a tool and a vehicle in that way. So long story longer, I
Well,
ended up getting help for that.
yeah, Kimberly, if I can just jump in real quick,
Yeah.
because I think this is, very instructive. You would mention our discussion when we had met a couple of weeks ago to talk about, the interview and to get to know each other a little more. I shared with you a gal named Dr. Teresa Larson.
Mhm.
She served as a Marine, and she has a book out called Warrior, and she talks exactly to the things you just talked about with, eating issues, disorder, whatever the right word or phrasing is.
Mhm.
But that's a fantastic book, and it touches on those for, for folks that may be struggling with that. That's another great resource is Dr. Teresa Larson, the Warrior rather. So
Okay.
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no. That's great. I'll definitely have to look that up. Um, so I ended up putting myself through a program in the hospital. And the interesting thing at the hospital is they were only talking about, they were just watching and monitoring your food intake. That was it. That was, I mean, they had some other therapeutic classes and groups and branch outs that we would do. But all the eating was monitored, and nobody was really getting to the crux of what the problem was, what the issue was. And when I left the program, I vowed, I made it a commitment to learn everything I could about how to take the best care of myself as possible and how to help others do the same. So I went back to school at mid to late 20s, got my degree in health promotion. And then after that, I started working in the government contracting field. And I was going up to New York City every other weekend to go to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And then I ended up becoming a board certified health coach, life coach, and I was teaching yoga and Pilates and kickboxing and fitness classes. So I was very deep, eyeballs deep in the health and wellness arena. I started my first little hobby business called Healthy Chick, and my uh, the reason my mission with that really was to bring health and wellness and nutrition information to the forefront, but in a more engaging, entertaining, uplifting way. My style of writing was a lot more animated at the time, and everything on the website, from the graphics and the blog. The blog was called Hip Chicks Eat Spinach. So that was that part. Around this time, I was married, and I had my first solo responsibility dog, Lobo, who I call my game changer dog. He's the reason why I ended up in this field. I mean, when I was a child, I always surrounded myself with animals. They have always been my comfort. I grew up not necessarily feeling like I belonged anywhere. I never really felt accepted. I felt like I always was hustling for for approval and for acceptance, and animals were my safe place. And I feel that a lot of people often do feel that way about animals because, again, they're such a pure, authentic, judgment-free type of relationship. It's just such a special bond. So it doesn't surprise me. I ended up working with animals later on, but Lobo, I didn't really know what I was doing when I was raising him. I was getting a bunch of information from people at the dog park, from friends, neighbors who had dogs. By this time, I think Caesar Milan had just started making a name for himself. This is many years ago. I think this was like Kirka 2000, well, maybe 2005.
And
Um,
Caesar, he's the dog whisperer. Is that
Yep,
the
he's Milan. He's
right?
the dog
Mhm.
whisperer. I actually ended up going out to Santa Clarita to train with him back in 2013, which was such a beautiful experience. I mean, he has such a presence. And I often talk about energy and dog training, but he has such a strong energy that you can feel him walk into the room long before you see him. But to watch him work with animals is really, really just cool. And with people too, because it's mainly about working with the human end of the leash. Um, but Lobo had developed a number of behavioral issues, I think around the age 2. And this is also around the time where my husband and I decided to split. And I, in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my dog? My dog needs training. My dog needs this. My dog needs that. It was my dog, my dog, my dog. And this is a very common mindset when it comes to dogs, especially those experiencing behavioral issues. And I went through probably about 6 or 7 different trainers. I spent thousands of dollars that I did not have at the time trying to fix my dog and help him through these behavioral issues. But what all of the trainers were doing at the time were just popping him full of treats and working on obedience directives. Um, and obedience training only speaks to the mental aspect of the dog. That's it. All it is just attaching meaning to verbal cues and directives. That is it. Does nothing for behavior. It's a very, very small element when it comes to behavior. So that's mainly how I ended up doing this work. Is he ended up biting someone pretty significantly, and he lost his life at age 3.5, and that absolutely crushed me.
I bet.
I had reached out to friends of friends of friends. I reached out to my ex to see if he could hang on to Lobo until I figured things out, and it was just, yeah. So that set me on this path of learning everything that I possibly could about dog training, about behavior, dog psychology, what all of those trainers missed, what they were not speaking to, either because of their own lack of awareness and education, or I don't know. But it's such a common story. I cannot tell you how many clients have ended up finding PackFit and coming to me after having moved through a number of different trainers before. And I really think it's also a breach of ethics. I mean, there has to be an awareness, that just an understanding of what the difference between obedience behavioral training is. I think it's up to the professional also to have this awareness and
Right. Right.
and
Well, yeah.
discipline.
So, looking at where I want to go with the interview here, um, I think the first question I was going to ask of you was, hey, what got you into this profession as an entrepreneur, coach, trainer, author? In the Marine Corps, we call the Marine Corps the profession of arms. So I don't know whether we call this the profession of pups or the puppy profession or or whatever you want to call it. But so it sounds like you talked a bit about that. So it sounds like Lobo was the catalyst that kind of got you thinking, hey, there's a need here. I just experienced some significant issues. How can I make that better? And hey, I like this. And, so there you go. Is there anything that you want to add to that in terms of your why for what you're doing now?
Um, Honestly, it's there's so many dogs, especially right now, like where there is a legitimate crisis going on right now. Honestly, I have not seen, just moving here to California too. It's been overwhelming. The number of dogs that people find loose that are just running around, the number of dogs being abandoned. You had a couple of dogs show up at your home
Yeah,
that have been dumped and
absolutely.
abandoned.
Yeah,
Um,
I can absolutely attest to that, Kim. The two dogs that came here, but we spent, we had them here for about a month, and tried to rehome them. And when we started looking at the other options, because we couldn't maintain them here because Watson was at the end of his time, and it was just too much, and we wanted to be fair to him because he'd been a family member for 12 years.
yeah.
Um, but to your point, when you look at the huge amount of dogs. It's not just dogs, but animals that are left unattended, right? Or they're dropped off at a shelter. The numbers are staggering. I mean, it tugs at the heartstrings because these are probably the vast majority of these dogs are good dogs, and they've just been let down by their humans. And
Huh.
there's only so much time that they have in certain shelters. Some
Yeah.
shelters, will maintain them as long as they can, and others have a timeline.
Owner
And then at
surrenders
the
are
end of
the
that
first to
time,
be euthanized. So when people drop their dogs off, the euthanasia rates right now have skyrocketed. They're the highest they've been in years. And
yeah,
a lot of people when COVID first hit, I mean everybody's businesses, of course, where everyone was impacted in various ways, but the economic aftermath that this has had a massive impact on small businesses, mine included. And it seems that people, instead of getting training for their dogs, they would either just, wipe their hands clean or wing it or get free training from YouTube. So, I mean, we're seeing a lot of decisions. I mean, the crisis, the economic crisis that we're in right now is also a big contributor as to why the euthanasia rates have skyrocketed and rescues and animal shelters everywhere are busting at the seams. I mean, there's a number of reasons, but it's really it's overwhelming. It's heartbreaking, because
it is, and it's very tragic. I felt horrible, having to surrender the two. But the good news is they both were adopted. They didn't stay together, and that's what we were attempting to do. We were trying to get somebody that would take both of them
yeah.
because they were evidently, it appeared that they were from the same litter. And we weren't sure, but yeah, I mean, I felt like a heel. I felt like I was letting them down. My tough Marine Corps self was sitting there getting teary-eyed when I was explaining to the gal at the shelter, how we got the dogs and that we've tried everything that we could and, connected with folks like yourself that, could give us more options. And, it's just, it's horrible. It really is. So, well, just for sake of time, I want to just move on to the next question. And we've referenced now a couple of times that we talked beforehand, which is I always do that with folks I interview. I either talk to them on the phone or a Zoom call, or if I can meet them in person, we'll do that. And sometimes the meetings are about 30 minutes. Sometimes they're like 2 hours, like ours was. And that could have been, I share with you, that really could have been the podcast. It was a great conversation. And so, in thinking through all of that and trying to kind of neck it down to, digestible timeline for an interview, I in my head it came up with the two things that I thought were important, which were for you, what you felt were the most consequential things that people need to understand about raising and training their dogs. And you came up with two areas. One was you call it the unknown difference between obedience and behavioral training. Then the other was you talked about how behavior is information and it's very complex in nature. I thought that was really cool. I was like, holy smokes. And so there's more to that. So if you could take some time and focus on those two things. And then as we talked about those two things, you smartly were saying, hey, that kind of segues in to some issues with trauma and with grief that children have. So let's go ahead and talk to those two issues, and then we'll, set up the discussion. And I've got a question for you about, children and trauma. Um, so let's go ahead and knock out that first one, the unknown difference between obedience and behavioral training.
Yeah, well, so obedience, to nutshell it, obedience training teaches a dog what to do. Behavioral training teaches them how to be. And a lot of dogs don't know how to be without what to do. The state of mind aspect, state of mind conditioning is something that I talk about a lot in training. People don't necessarily understand excitement. When I talk about state of mind, it's a measure of a dog's level of arousal. It's a measure of their excitement, and it's also a measure of their intensity. So oftentimes the behaviors that people struggle with their dogs were actually conditioned unknowingly by them. And this is through a lot of the patterns, habits, things that we're doing and not doing, things that we're speaking to and not speaking to every single day. But obedience training speaks to the mental aspect of the dog. It attaches meaning to verbal cues and directives. Behavioral training speaks to everything else. Even compliance. A dog can understand a cue or directive, but whether or not they comply is a different thing. So when we bring dogs into our homes, we're essentially entering into a relationship with them. And at the heart and core and foundation of every solid relationship is the trust and respect factor. If you don't have trust and respect, you've got nothing to build on, you've got nothing to grow from, and the dog will give you the middle finger every time you ask them to do something. So it's usually not the trust factor that's lacking in most dynamics as much as it is the respect factor. Most folks are trying to be their dog's BFF, and they're not representing any level of stability, security, safety, and authority. It's raising a dog is very much like raising a child. I mean, there is a level of parenting involved. The dog is 100% dependent and reliant upon us to show up, to teach, equip, follow through, and all of that. A lot of people don't understand how to communicate with their dogs clearly and effectively. They think that throwing a bunch of words at them is somehow going to stick and they're going to magically understand what it is that we're saying. There's a lot of things that go into communication, and this falls under the behavioral training umbrella as well. So just to clarify, obedience training is teaching cues and directives like sit, down, off, come, place, and what have you. That's it. Behavioral training is more state of mind conditioning, relationship building, relevance building, socialization and exposure. I think when I say the word socialization, a lot of people automatically think of play, a dog's ability to play with others. Play is a type of conversation. Playfulness is a characteristic. A dog's level of sociability should never be measured by their ability to play. It's how can I nutshell this? Socialization is a level of exposure. Their ability to play is wonderful, but you can also have dogs who are very rude, who are very invasive when it comes to space. Although they're playful, they can also be very rude and invasive too. So a dog's
Well,
level.
Kimberly, along those lines, now is that something like people? Is it not necessarily a type of person? Like, there's no breed of dog that's necessarily that way, or is it just the dog's personality? What are your thoughts
No,
there?
behavior is not breed specific. They're going to carry, there's genetics plays a very small, it is an element. It's a small element. There's some characteristics and traits that are going to translate. But every dog's very much an individual. I mean, I've met, there are a lot of certain breeds of dogs. I think something that happens that is very common is someone will have a wonderful experience with a certain breed of dog. They'll have like a Springer Spaniel that they're just buddy with. They love that Springer Spaniel passes away. They get another Springer Spaniel expecting the same thing. And they end up with a different personality. And they're like, well, my last dog didn't do this. And every dog
Mm.
is very much an individual. So when it comes to social ability and exposure, there is a window, like within the dog's first year of life, we should be exposing them, getting them around things like moving trash cans, other children, other people, dogs, not in an overwhelming way. There is a strategy and a certain approach that we need to take to it, but we also need to take into consideration like who the individual dog is before we do this work. Because you might have a very soft energy dog, a dog that is highly sensitive. You could have a dog that is easily overwhelmed by a lot of sights, sounds, motions, people, distractions, too many things going on. So for that type of dog, you would definitely want to take smaller steps. For a
Right.
stronger energy dog that is more self-certain, more confident, more self-assured, then the approach that you take with that type of dog would probably look a little bit different. The softer energy dog, there's some things that in raising dogs that need to exist: structure, order, rules, boundaries, very much like raising children. Discipline, there's a yin and yang to discipline. I don't know if for when it comes to discipline, I think over the years a lot of people have shied away from using words like discipline or punishment for some reason. Maybe it was the Dr. Spock's positive child rearing books that came out. But all of a sudden, punishment became a dirty word. Discipline became a dirty word, and kids were getting trophies for not stealing their friends' lunch money. I mean, it's
Right.
but there has to some levels of it absolutely must exist. Consequences must exist. We learn through consequences, and I'm not talking about pain or hurting or anything like that. I define punishment as creating a level of discomfort that is meaningful enough to the individual to make them change their course. So discomfort could be by a loud sound. It could be a stern or a low tone voice. It could be with a dog, like a pop on a leash, or maybe closing space. So there's 4 different levels of space, right? There's public space, social space, personal space, and intimate space. And actually, the more sensitive dogs do tend to be more sensitive about their personal and intimate space, and other people and other dogs, children, whoever, coming into it when they don't have existing rapport, familiarity, comfort, and relationship with them. That's how,
Yeah, this is so incredible to me because it's so much like people, right? My as you were talking about the more sensitive dog and the less sensitive dog, from personal experience, it goes right back to Watson, who was the bigger dog. Well, he was more sensitive.
yeah,
He was things that he wasn't sure of. He was very leery of.
yeah,
Loud noises. He didn't. That would spook him. Where
yeah,
the little one, the Yorkie, she was an animal. She didn't care. She had no boundaries, very, very smart dog, but just a very, very different, demeanor, and their behaviors were, I wish I would have known more about what you're talking about now. I mean, some of it you would think is intuitive, but not necessarily because it's a dog, so you're not sure what's going on in terms of, hey, is this going to work behaviorally? Because I don't want to say he suffered from being sensitive, but it was absolutely noticeable. Like he didn't like men, and we got him at a shelter. We adopted him, and so we were thinking, well, maybe there was an issue where he was being mistreated, and so he was gun shy around men. But he was kind of shy around most people, but specifically men, and just things that you'd look at him and say, "Watson, you're a big chicken,"
yeah.
But he's such
It
a
is
soft-hearted dog.
interesting. Like, it's human nature to, when there's a question mark anywhere, we want to fill in the gap. We want to connect the dots. And this happens oftentimes with dogs is we'll come up with stories. And especially in rescue, that story, most of the time, the story that we come up with and the assumptions that we make are wrong. And then it attaches to the dog and follows that dog wherever they go. And it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. But, dogs don't live in the past. Humans do. We either live in the future or in the past. Very rarely are we living in the present moment. And this is how dogs really help us in that way, because they're very present beings. They do form associations with certain things that can get triggered, especially if it was an unfortunate, circumstance. Like with people, when it comes to traumatic events, of course, we hold on to those traumatic events. With dogs, it starts to form like our beliefs, our filters, how we receive information, how we send out information, how we perceive it, how we interpret it, all of that. With dogs, it's just association. So if in their earlier years, if they were being cared for by a guy with a cane and a hat, and he was very angry and he always made a bunch of noise wherever he went, maybe he hit the dog with a cane or whatever, an association, it's like that gets frozen, snapshotted and frozen in time. An association is created. But sometimes the more sensitive dogs will not necessarily be fearful of men, but they could be highly in tune with the energy of that person. So if you have a very soft, highly sensitive dog, someone with a stronger energy that comes in can be a little overwhelming for that dog. There's a masterclass that I have called Training the Strong Energy Dog, and it talks mainly about energy. Energy is one of those things that does not get discussed enough in dog training. You could also, I see this all the time too. I don't believe in mismatches when it comes to dogs and people. I think that every dog that comes into our lives and onto our paths is going to teach us something new and challenge us in ways that will always benefit us. The Caesar has a wonderful quote. He says, "We might not always get the dog we want, but we always get the dog we need," which I love. But they will challenge us in ways that benefit us. So if you have a stronger energy person with a softer energy dog, and there's that discrepancy there, that strong energy person, their energy can be very overwhelming to a highly sensitive soft dog. And if you have a super strong energy dog that's with a very soft energy human, there's that gap there, and that the dog is just going to come in and essentially take over, and the person's going to struggle in the relationship with the dog because they're calling the shots, and there's so just like with children, raising dogs, if you have a stronger energy dog, they're going to require more rules, more boundaries, more structure and order. And there's a natural structure and order to how everything operates in nature, especially the animal kingdom. So when dogs come in as pet dogs and they're living in a home where there are no rules, no parameters, no limitations, there's no order, there's no structure, there's no routine, there's nothing going on, it can create a great deal of anxiety and chaos. And you're going to see that reflected behaviorally. They thrive and they feel more safe, secure, and comfortable when those components exist, especially the stronger energy dogs. But if you have a softer energy dog that's kind of like a marshmallow that just rolls with everything and is just like peace, love, and chicken grease, that doesn't push or test the boundaries in any way. I mean, that's a different thing. We really have to know our dog. We have to know what our dog's personality is like. We have to know them in order to best reach them and know what they need from us, so we can set them up, with what they need to know to live in the world with us and feel safe doing it.
Right. And you were talking a few weeks ago about how the bulk of dog training is actually training, equipping, and empowering the human responsible for teaching, guiding, and raising the dog. What can you share about that a little bit more? Because I think that's where we were kind of getting into how you could transition to the trauma that we want to talk about for kids, when dogs pass on.
Yeah. Well, like we said earlier, so behavior is information. The same, it's true for dogs. It's also very, very true for us. And a lot of the behaviors that we're struggling with our dogs, like I said earlier, are conditioned unknowingly by us through the things, our little habits and the little rituals and the things that we do every day, what we're addressing, what we're not addressing, what we're ignoring, what we're avoiding, what we're denying, what we're resisting. I mean, there's a lot of information in resistance. There's a lot of information in what we're denying. Knowing what a dog's needs are, and again, there's a lot of parallels with human needs and what dogs' needs are. Knowing there are basic essential needs, of course, like food, I'm not going to go down the nutrition route. Most dogs these days are eating food like product and not real food. And I could go off on that, but I won't. But giving them, clean water, shelter from the elements, of course, those are the basics. But then there's also, feeling of safety and security. Like, do they feel safe and secure in their own skin? Do they feel safe and secure being under the guidance and tutelage of the humans that they're with? Do they feel safe and secure being in the world around them? Most dogs do not, and most people do not. So when we when we start reflecting and working on ourselves, we're indirectly helping our dogs as well, because they are always looking to us for how to feel about every situation they're brought into. They want to know, look, am I safe with you? Do you know who I am? Will you meet my needs? Can you meet my needs? How we're showing up every day. Energy is information. If I'm showing up every day and I'm anxious and frustrated and impatient and angry and ticked off at the world, or depressed, very low, anything like that, that's all information. And our dogs are like, okay, am I safe with that? So there's a common saying in the dog training world, who's leading who? Like when we're out on walks, who's leading who? Or is the dog walking you, or are you walking the dog? And it's not so much about who's leading who as much as it is what is leading. Is it anxiety leading? Body positioning is very big in the animal world. When the dog is in front on a walk, it's a very empowering place to be. So whatever that individual dog has going on, more often than not, if they're highly anxious, for example, they're in the front position and they're guiding and dictating and leading the walk. It's going to that anxiety is going to be amplified. So whatever the individual dog has going on is going to be amplified when they're in the front forward position. There's the walk is something, it's such a magical experience, and people think it's just about leashing a dog up and getting some sunlight and exercise, but there's an entire conversation that's going on, a much bigger conversation. It's such a wonderful opportunity to teach and instill things, and to bridge gaps, and to build comfort and familiarity and security and all that. But that's another tangent I won't go off on, but
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing I certainly miss now. I've got a couple acres and um, he was always right there with me, and now there's things to do, but it's just not quite the same. I missed that time with him because he was my buddy. I mean, he was like I have two daughters. Well, he was my son. He really
yeah.
was. He was the only boy, and yeah, I was just so connected with him. It's like we read each other's minds. I know that probably sounds goofy to some people,
No, not
but
at all.
yeah, he was just always there, and um, I don't know. I don't want to get into how much I miss him, but it's, you know, other than to say, the grief factor is so real because they become part of our family, and we love them, just like you had mentioned, just like having kids, and sometimes you see them deteriorate because, they get sick, and that's what happened with him. Sometimes it's quick, the quick happened with our smaller dog. It was just in one day we, wound up having to take her, and the vet was like, "Holy smokes!" There was a lot of issues, but she was not signaling anything until she had a seizure and then kind of passed out, and then it was like, "Whoa!" And then that, of course, we go to the vet, and it was like, "Holy smokes!" But so all that to say, getting towards the whole issue of the trauma and the grief that comes with when you lose a pet. If we can just transition real quick to that, and only because of time, I want to respect your time here. Uh, so when we look at that, what are things that parents and adults need to know and understand about how the death of pets actually impacts children? We know it impacts us adults too, but what are some things that you can share along those lines?
Well, with children, it's new. So it can be far heavier, and there's definitely going to be a lot of question marks. I mean, with children, when it comes to the emotional spectrum, a lot of feelings can be and are new to certain degrees. And I think that's, one of the things, what we're calling mental health isn't mental health at all. It's emotional health. When we talk about, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but when we talk about things like depression and addiction and, eating disorders responses, and all of those things, there's a very, very strong emotional health trauma component to it, but which it all starts, when we're, of course, very, very young. um, the book Pieces in Heaven is the children's book I wrote for kids, but honestly, it's for people of all ages. That there was an idea that came to me a few nights before Levi passed in a dream, very, very clearly. And it was that when we love another so deeply, in this case, our dogs, we give them a piece of our hearts. And when they cross over, they take those pieces of our hearts with them. And when we reunite with them on the other side, we get those pieces of our hearts back, making us whole again. So that stuck with me, and it really made an impression on me. And I said goodbye to Levi a couple days later. And as hard as that was, that idea really just kind of carried me through it. And I wove a story around it. So that's how the book came to be. But um, with adults, I mean, we're more seasoned. We've surfed the emotional waves. We've been up and down on the spectrum, the emotional spectrum. We have experience with a number of different things. I don't think we necessarily are very strong with uh, putting language to it, leaning into emotion instead of away, for holding space for it for ourselves and for others. Typically big, heavy, and intense and uncomfortable emotions are things that we really struggle with, and our children are watching us, and how we deal with heavy and intense and uncomfortable emotions. And it becomes like an emotional generational trauma who that has repeating patterns, right? We watch our parents and how they handle big, heavy, uncomfortable emotions, how they handle tough times, how they, whatever. But it's human nature to want to silence anything big, heavy, and uncomfortable. We want to shut it down, shut it off. We want to numb it. We want to suppress it. We want to deny it. We want to resist it. We want to avoid it. And I think that um, learning how to put our feelings into words and express those feelings, and learning how to sit with whatever it is that we're feeling, and um, develop a level of comfort with the emotional spectrum is a skill set. I think it's an important one. So so yeah,
You
I
know,
think.
Kim, something you brought up. I mean, I see that, as a parent, my oldest will be 30. I can't believe that, coming up in May. And then my youngest just turned 26 a couple days ago. And, you know, you're so right about how this kind of trauma is oftentimes the first significant amount of, trauma and grief that they face. I mean, they face stuff daily at school, and, those are whole different issues, but the significance of a loss is just so incredible, and, just thinking back as a parent, um, my experience with grief on my dad's side, a lot of people died in succession in a short amount of time, and I was very young, even before we had dogs. And, so that was just, it was such a weird thing as a kid, trying to understand all that. And, my dad certainly wasn't anyone who was a comforter. My mom was, but it was just different times, right? This was back in the, late 60s, early 70s. And nowadays, I think we probably are a little more open to things like that. It is so important for kids to have somebody that can, kind of shepherd them through this process. And that's why I think your book is such a great idea because of the love that we have for our animals. Maybe it's a little easier to talk to that than it is maybe talking about what we go through when we lose, you know, humans, people, because, that's at this level, right? We're human to human, but really losing animals, dog to human, is right there too. And so that's a great way of being able to touch on those issues that will help build those skills that you talked about for later in life when they wind up losing someone that is very close or significant to them relationship wise. I think that's that's wonderful. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's grief is proof there was deep love, right? It's just, and I
yeah.
think as the saying goes, it's love would just know where to go.
Mm.
Well,
Well, I know your book, the human end of the leash, that's coming out soon. You want to take a couple quick minutes and
yeah.
give us the 1,000 foot level of the book for folks that would be interested.
Well, it speaks well more to the human end of the leash. I mean, it's just behavior, because behavior is so complex. The what I'm trying to get across through the book is helping people become far more aware of what they're doing and not doing when it comes to their dogs. Um, what we're not addressing and what we're not facing will show up as through behavior. What we're denying, resisting, all of that shows up through behavior. So a lot of the coping mechanisms and tactics that we use to silence, suppress, shut down, shut off, numb, all of that stuff, these tactics that we use to deal with all of the big, heavy, uncomfortable, intense emotions actually becomes our behavior. So it's the book is just about, well, shining a light on all of it. And there's also some dog raising and dog training know-how in there, but I don't think the human end of the leash gets spoken to often enough in behavioral training, which is why most training programs will reach it immediately places a cap on it and how far people can go. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of trainers will offer board and train programs, right? So dogs will come live with a trainer for a while. I offered it myself, but I really did everything I possibly could to empower and pump people full of information and work with them on developing the skill sets and then da. But a lot of people won't speak to that part of it. So the dog goes to the board and train, gets all trained up, and then returns back to the human. But the human will still struggle with behavior when it comes to the dog. So, and that's because there's a number of things, a number of just how they're showing up. Like, are they showing up super anxious, like we were talking about earlier? Are they showing up just really frustrated and impatient and angry? Are they dealing with stuff or not dealing with stuff? And it's impacting how they're showing up, because our energy is also information. Dogs, especially the more sensitive ones, are highly in tune with it. They pick up on all that stuff. So are we meeting their needs every day? Are we meeting their physical energy needs? Are we meeting their mental needs? Like, it's when the brain is an organ. Like, the brain wants to problem solve, it wants to learn things, it wants to connect dots. So when we're not fulfilling that part of them, there's an unmet need. They want to feel safe, they want to feel secure, they want to know that they can look to us and rely upon us and depend on us. If they don't, that's an unmet need. They have, some dogs will be lower energy, medium energy, and higher energy, physically speaking. If you have a super high energy dog and they're not getting sufficient energy, they're not getting their energy needs met sufficiently, that's going to reflect in behavior too. Like, they're going to end up being very frustrated. And behavior is just information. I mean, there's a lot there's a lot that I can tell about the dynamic and the nature of the relationship, what goes down on the home front without even spending time in the home by watching a person on a walk with their dog. If there's not a lot of rules and boundaries and parameters and things like that going on in the home, you're going to see that reflected in the walk. You know, the dog's just going to be
Right.
doing whatever they want, doing this and that, dragging the person everywhere, da da da. So, I mean, there's a lot of information you can extract by watching um, a person on a walk with their
Right.
dog.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's so true. I mean, when you see that, it's like people are so one-dimensional, right? It's like they just assume that the dog's gonna behave just because, of how they are interacting with the dog. And if the dog doesn't get it, like you said, there's not a match, right? So
Yeah.
instead of looking in the mirror and kind of saying, all right, well, what am I doing wrong? What isn't there something that I could be doing to make a difference in my dog's life? And you talked about the connection with energy and whatnot. I know when I'm a big time college football fan, and Texas, the Longhorns are my favorite team, and without going into why, but anyhow, when I would sit here and watch the game, Watson's right next to me, and when I start getting tense, he comes over and he's like, wanting to make me feel better. If he thinks I'm not happy or if I get excited, then he starts to get he would cue off me.
Yeah.
And his color, he was actually kind of the same color as the burnt orange. So, he was like my Longhorn dog.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was so funny to see him just cue off of my emotion, whether I was, excited or whether I was like, that
Yeah.
exhale, then he feels that level of frustration. It was so interesting
Yeah.
that,
Do you,
in the other dog, Bella, she's sleeping, she didn't, she didn't
yeah.
care.
Do you
Oh,
see
I see.
the dog in the little chair over there?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's Ronan. Ronan is a highly, highly sensitive dog. He's the same way Watson is. If I start to feel a lot of pressure or get anxious or worried, or even if I'm really excited or whatever, he's so in tune with my energy. And the funny thing about him is, so dogs have four main drives: sex drive, which is a very powerful drive in dogs. And another thing out here is probably one of the reasons why a lot of dogs are going missing or getting lost is because males can scent a female in heat from miles away. So, a lot of people, for some reason, leave their dogs unattended and unsupervised outside, which is shocking just given the level of coyote activity and natural predators that are in the area. But anyways,
yeah.
but a lot of dogs are constantly running off here. And I've never in my life seen anything like that, honestly. It's every single day. There's just dogs being found. My dog is missing. It's like, how does your dog go missing? But anyways, um, so yeah, and even a female in heat, they will roam and to look for a mate. They will claw themselves out of the secured area to go find a mate. So there's sex drive is very powerful, but there's also uh, pack drive, which is more relationship oriented, defense drive, which includes fight, flight, freezing up, hoodwinking, which essentially means diffusing the discomfort of a situation by turning it into a game, or just complete avoidance. So it's how dogs manage and deal with their levels of discomfort. And prey drive. So you've got low, medium, high. I think I already said prey drive, but Ronan has his defense drive is hoodwinking. So whenever he starts to feel any level of discomfort or intensity, he automatically like kicks it into high gear and tries to play. And if that's why we have two huskies, Steve's huskies,
Right.
his two dogs. If they were to ever give him a correction, or if my other dog Frank, the hot dog, were to give him a correction, he'll take a correction, but then he like gets super playful and gets in their face, and he's like, "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it." So it's really funny, but I mean that's also going to play into behavior and their personality, their individual personalities, like their different levels of drive. My big guy Levi had probably one of the most insane prey drives I've ever seen in a dog. He would go from 0 to 100 in nanoseconds. I mean, certain dogs are going to have different levels of drive. A lot of people misinterpret prey drive as aggression. It's not aggression. It can be aggressive in nature, of course. Like Levi killed a baby skunk one day. I was heartbroken. Oh, I couldn't believe it. But he had killed a baby skunk. And I mean, if he saw a fox or a deer, he was a good teacher in that regard. I'd worked, of course, with a lot of dogs with varying levels of prey drive, but he challenged me, really
Yeah.
challenged me.
Yeah. Yeah. Watson, when he was younger, he actually got attacked by coyotes twice. He got he was getting out. We have a three rail fence with a metal mesh that goes around so things can't come in, things can't go out. The rabbit can get through, but anything larger, they'd have to hop the
Yeah.
fence, right? But twice, we found him out and, he got bit on the back haunches each time, those two times. And we were like, how the heck? So one day I saw how he got out. He went underneath the fence, the metal fabric. He looked like a sheet of paper going under a door. I couldn't believe it, and that time he got out, he was bigger and he
Yeah.
chased it down and he grabbed it by the back of the neck and they both tumbled and the coyote took off, because he was pretty big and he didn't see it go the direction it went. He went the opposite way and it took me 15 minutes to corral him. He was so fired up. His ears just fell off. He wasn't
Yeah.
listening. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's that, that upper level of okay, they would come up to the fence like the younger ones and like play with him to
Yeah.
try to get him to come out and be the main course, right? He didn't know. He was just thinking they were his buddies. But well, we're right about. I know time goes by so quick. We're right about at an hour, and so what I want to do, we had chatted about this in the pregame. I want to take a quick minute here and go to your website. So I'm
Mhm.
going to share this on the screen here. Pardon me. And then, I want to show folks the homepage and then go real quick to your book section because you've got a lot of books and there's a lot of cool stuff there. So give me 1 second to do that.
Sure.
Okay, so here we go. This should be, if you guys can tell me, can you see?
Hmm.
This is the homepage. Again, it's at packfit.net. There's a great picture of you and your pack there.
My crew.
Yeah. And I love how when you scroll down, the letters, slowly come up and you've got your areas there. A lot of information here. And which pup is this here?
Oh, that's a stock photo.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah. It
you
was
got
just
you
a
got to
really
have
cute,
those.
it was a really cute, adorable pup.
Yeah, and that guy looks familiar there.
Ah.
So, so let me shoot over here to the books. Oops, there we go. I don't know why that popped up. Okay, so this is the book section. As you can see here, there's her book, My Buddha. And then here's the one that's coming out here soon, available for pre-order. Then here's the fantastic book you're writing for children and for adults, Pieces in Heaven. I like your story about, the naming of the book. That's nice. That made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then there's more here as we go down. There's your sequel.
I wonder why that's not.
Look at this. That's amazing how many books that you have. And
Those
then,
those were back in my healthy chick days.
oh, are they?
Yeah.
Well, something you had shared earlier, for folks that were, uh, seeing this live today, could you share what that surprise is for folks?
Oh, it's an hour discussion. It was a presentation that I had done for another um uh it was another interview that I did, and it's called The Gifts of Trauma and How Dogs Help Us Heal. So it's about an hour discussion. And I have a PDF with a bunch of resources on it, and tips and insights. And then I'm also offering folks the complete dog walking meditations album. So that expires on October 31st. So hopefully folks will log in and pick that up. But it speaks to a number of different things. There's affirmations in there. Meditation is one of those things that a lot of folks struggle with or have some kind of like preconceived notion. It's basically just getting centered, getting grounded, tuning back in with yourself, and it's self-regulation. We'll call it that. So my walks and hikes with the dogs, I'm heavy in meditation the entire time, and prayer. That's my time and my space. That's when we're all out together and we're in nature and we're just getting recentered and regrounded. So I thought it would be a cool thing to couple that, turning the dog walk into more of a meditative, recentering, regrouping type of thing. So the album has a number of different topics and things that I hit on. So there's triumph through trauma. There's some on grief and anxiety. There's some on just positive affirmations. There's some on confidence. So there's different ones,
Right.
but I'm
Well,
offering
well,
those.
thank you for doing that. It's very gracious of you to do
Pleasure.
that. Yeah, I think folks are going to enjoy that. And some of the folks that were on the call had to drop off, on a Tuesday, mid part of the day. Folks have other things going on too. But thanks for doing that. So, well, with that said, I want to bring the interview to a conclusion here. But I want to give you, is there anything else you want to share with us in closing? Any final thoughts?
Nothing off the top of my head. It was really nice to connect with you all and be able to share, some of the work.
Well, absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I'm so glad I finally got a chance to meet you, a couple of weeks ago, and I met with her and Steve. We had a cup of coffee. Steve and I, that's our thing. We go out and meet up for coffee. Sometimes we meet up for wine. It just depends. But it was good to see the person that he's been talking so highly of in his life, and so that's a fantastic thing. So. Okay. Well, with that said, Sarah, I'm going to turn it back over to you for folks that may have a couple questions here.
Okay, thank you, Scott and Kimberly. That was really wonderful. I'll put it to gallery here. Um, yeah, I just want to say really quickly, Kimberly, you know what was so special about this talk? Not only your expertise with dogs, but it was really neat to hear about your background and just who you are. So thank you for sharing so vulnerably. It really was a great part of this, because you really let us in. And so it makes it so clear why you're doing what you're doing and what a wonderful fit that is. And just a great person you are. I really enjoyed it. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you. And then Paul.
First, Scott Artley, and for your wisdom, both with humans and with dogs. And I left a note for you because there's a lot more that I wanted to share, but I know we're limited on time. So I will just say this. If you ever decide to go into psychology, you could start a whole new industry, psychologist for dogs and people.
Yeah.
That's about a year and so I studied a lot of things, but um, it just struck me that that's really what you're doing, and you ought to be licensed in it so you can do other things too.
I'll come up with my own
Anyway,
certification.
Yeah.
I certify
And
myself.
look at the chat when you have a minute. I love some other things there for you. So anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
I'm so glad that you took something away from it.
Oh, I took a lot of things away from it. Really a lot of things. I think we all did. Paying attention, missed out because there was so much, and it was very rich in content, by the way.
Thank you.
And we appreciate that.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Hope you'll come back and see us often.
As many
Because
times as you'll have me.
thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Holly.
Thanks, both Kim and Scott for this. It was really interesting and fun to hear. I love animals. We have 5 grand dogs
Ah, I love it.
with 8 grandkids too.
Wow.
My youngest son has 2, and that's his family. He's not married, has no kids. So I'm excited to get your meditation for walking for him because he walks them all the time and he brings them to work with him, and he can do that. He lives up in northern Minnesota and works deep in the woods. So he's with those dogs all the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, they're amazing. They're just so connected. And the stuff you said, just we experienced so much of the healing from the pets when we were going through grief. And we had a full-size collie that was had belonged to a friend of mine as a little tiny puppy, and she was in a very abusive relationship, and by the time Mira was 4 months old, she was getting out of that relationship and gave us Mira. We lived out in the country, and she couldn't, and as a full-size collie, she really needed to have that land, and that it was wonderful. My husband had such a grasp of Mira's needs. Like, it was all about Mira needs to work, that she's a working dog. And so he helped her learn the land that we had, the property we had, and how she could work and announce. And she was so precious. She was like Winston, though. She was afraid of men, except for my husband. And one of my sons, I have 4 sons, and it was, those of you who know me, it was Daniel that she was not afraid of, my 3rd born son, who was in the military. And she was terrified of bikes too. We never knew what the trigger was, but when she saw bikes and men that she didn't know would set her off. And when early on, she was maybe 5 months old, we were on a hike with her on a trail behind our property, and it was just her and Danny and me. And there was some bikes parked on the trail where the kids had gone off to pick berries, and she just put the brakes on. And now by 5 months, she was full size physically and big collie, and she was not moving. And to go around those bikes, and Danny picked her up. She let him pick her up, and she put her head on his shoulder like a little child, and he carried her around those bikes. And we went on all happy, and then we came back, and she needed him to do the same thing. And it was, I don't know, it's just a really precious memory for me of a relationship. And Danny, see, that was in like 06. So about 4 years later, Danny was killed in Afghanistan. And I don't know how to explain it, but I tell you, she knew. I mean, there was a change in her, and it was not like she was devastated like I was for a while. It was more like she would look at me, and I'd look in those eyes, and I knew she was telling me, he's good, he's good. And there was I can't even explain it. She was a tangible comfort for me, and in words that I can't verbalize. And she was just an amazing, amazing dog. And you were talking about how we lose them too. And I'll just briefly tell you, our losing of Mira was so traumatic A neighbor was drinking and driving and lost control onto our property and ran over our dog in our yard. And we had to, and it was at night. My husband was right there. He saw it, so it was trauma for him. But Mira suffered, and I had to drive to find a vet to go get somebody to come out and put her out of that horrible pain. And out in the country, we have barn cats. We had all sorts of animals, and they were just it was like a community surrounding us. There was a circle of our animals with Mira in the middle and on my lap while the vet put her to sleep. And we've never been able to replace her with any pets after that. It was just quite the loss for our family. But my kids have all made sure that there's lots of dogs in our family. So I will I'm going to go to your website, and I'm really thank you for all the things that you shared. I agree with Paul. You definitely get a certification for something.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry to hear about that. There was a book, I don't know if Laura Lynn Jackson, it's a book called Signs, the Secret Language of the Universe.
Mm.
I received countless unbelievable signs from all of my dogs. The most recent with Levi. And even with my grandmother, she's the only person in my family that I've been really connected with. She was the only person in my family I was close with. Most of my family is estranged, my parents, my sister and I, and what have you. And I will tell you, when my grandmother passed, I was in Mississippi at the time, and I went home and I went up to my room, and the radio was on a gospel channel. Not once ever has that radio ever been set on the gospel channel. She used to listen to gospel music all the time. We would watch Doris Day, Rock Hudson movies. We would watch I Love Lucy reruns every single night together. But she listened to gospel. She was a Southern Baptist woman. She would listen to gospel all the time, but the radio was playing gospel when I got home that day. And so when it comes to signs, that there's so many stories I want to share, but for the sake of time, with Levi, most recently he passed, and I was sitting back in the bedroom with my other two dogs, Franklin and Ronan, and Steve's Huskies were outside. Everybody else was outside the room, and I heard howling. And Levi and my dogs, that was their thing to do together. They would always howl and sing together. Levi would always start it, and then they would all rush in and they would start joining him. And it was this big ceremonious thing. It was like a celebration every single time, but he would also sing on cue. I would say, Levi, you want to sing? And he'd throw his head back and he'd say, "Arr!" And it would come from the tips of his toes. Like he would put his all into it. And I heard howling, but it was like a slow, melancholy sounding howling. And after it kept going on, I was like, gosh, what's going on? Are the Huskies, like, are they, I thought it might be the Huskies howling or something. So I got up, I left the bedroom, and I walked out, and I was like, Steve? And Steve wasn't home. He had gone to the grocery store. I didn't know that. And I was looking around, I was checking all the rooms. I still heard the howling, but then it stopped once I got to the kitchen, and I checked all the rooms to see if the Huskies were maybe locked in a room somewhere and they were howling to get out. But I looked out back, and they were sleeping out back just in the sun. They were both asleep. There was no explanation for where that howling came from. And I really, truly believe that it was Levi and maybe even the other guys that were just reunited. But Steve's daughter heard it too. So I know I wasn't losing my mind. But there are signs. I don't believe death is just a transition. I'm not minimizing the occasion, of course. I mean, it's to lose people that we love and that we cherish, and dogs that we love and cherish, it's like a piece of you. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's gone.
Yeah.
But I really truly believe that they're very much still around us, and they're trying to show us. They do show us in a lot of different ways. After I read Signs, The Secret Language for the Universe, I started becoming very specific and asking for signs, because I'm a praying gal, and I've got a faith, and it's that's that. But I would get very specific and ask for signs, and I would ask for signs from Chip, my other dog that passed, and Todd. And I would get like Chip sent me a sign one day. I was watching a Friends rerun, the TV show Friends, and the episode that aired, she kept mentioning her ex-boyfriend Chip throughout the entire episode. So it's just things like that. There was a hummingbird that kept coming to the window for 4 days right before Levi passed. The hummingbird would flit up to the kitchen window and just stare inside, and it would flit, 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 flit. But she would show up every single morning. And then when Levi passed, she hasn't done it since. But there's other ways. I think that our loved ones are very much still with us, and they're still trying to connect with us and communicate with us. I think some are more open to that than others. I think there's a lot that gets missed. But I mean, we're also human. We like to believe in the tangible and the real, and what we see or think that we see. But I just, yeah, I think that they're still very much with us and all around us, and yeah, very present.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I you had talked about, your grandma. I had I was very close with my mom's parents. They were like a second set of parents for me growing up. But when my grandma passed, she was in hospice, and my youngest uh, was back from college. She flew out and she was able to come. My oldest daughter was working. She couldn't make it, but my youngest daughter could. And so she left, went back home. My daughter, she went back to, this was in Virginia. Daughter went back to California. And the next morning at about 8, I was still on California time. So it's like 5 in the morning for me. I'm on the couch at my mom's place. And I felt this breeze, this rush across my body. It was like, it wasn't cold. It was just, it was absolute, you know, air moving. You can feel it. And within a few minutes later, I got a phone call, or my mom's phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was the hospice saying that she had just passed, and that was like, wow, that's incredible. So yeah, I think there are signs. I think God has a way of, giving us some assurance, right? That there is something after this life. And, he's the guy that runs the show. So, so that's a
Yeah,
good thing.
the soul never dies, right? I mean, the soul is energy, and I think that God is love. We come from love. We spend our lives trying to remember who we are as love, and then we return to love when we pass. So yeah, they're there.
Amen.
Signs are there.
Yeah. Cool. Well, hey, real quick, Holly, you had mentioned when you talked about my dog, you said Winston instead of Watson,
Oh,
and which
Watson's.
yeah, no, which is fine because now I'm going to write that down because I love that. That's the new name. That's the next dog that comes in to the family is going to be named Winston. I love that. He got his name from my youngest daughter. She was pretty young when we brought him into the family. We had already had Bella. We had her for a couple years, but she was little, but she was the boss, right? She was in charge. So when we brought Watson in, it was like, well, what are we going to name him? And then Taylor was like, well, he's Bella's sidekick, so let's call him Watson, like Sherlock Holmes and Watson. So that stuck right away. So now Winston, Winston Churchill, he's a
Yeah.
good figure in history. Now I'm gonna Now I just got to talk somebody into getting the the new dog, but
Need
that's
a
going to be his
dog.
name.
You need a dog
What's-
named Winston, Scott.
oh,
Yeah,
what you
that
did?
is like a perfect fit. Yes, a
Yeah.
dog named Winston for Scott.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
You might consider Sir Winston with a full name of Sir Winston Spencer Churchill.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah. Paul, I've got a friend
Uh,
on LinkedIn, Gary Stingard. His dog, his little poodle has like 5 names, like something Beauregard, this, that,
yeah.
he's down in the South. So it's funny because he'll make comments and every time he talks about the dog, he puts the full name of the dog in.
That's funny.
Yeah.
My dog Raina had like 20 different names and she responded to them all. She knew
Oh, wow.
it was funny. 20
Yeah.
is maybe of an over exaggeration, but she had probably like 6 solid names that I would call her, but she she would respond to them all.
That's
Yeah,
hilarious.
I did the same with both dogs, had little, pet nicknames for them.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I'd sing them too. And then,
Yep. Oh, I
but,
sing to my dogs
but
every
they
day.
love that. Yeah. Wow.
Well, I think is that a wrap here? I don't want to cut
Yeah.
anybody off, but that was an amazing talk. That was wonderful. Scott, thank you so much for bringing Kimberly on. Kimberly, you were a joy. That was just gives a whole new perspective to owning a dog and to being in a relationship. Doesn't even seem right to say owning a dog.
Yeah,
It's
I usually say animal companions or
yeah.
yeah, I've never liked using the word ownership or owning a dog. Yeah, it's I get where you're going with that.
They have such strong personalities. We can't
Yeah.
own them. I just when I think of our pets and our just a real one quick thing too with I talked about we had this barn cats. We had a black cat named Pie Wacket who just showed up and I mean and that name fit him and he was very independent, very, very cattish. And we used to joke about him so much. He had such great personality. And he too when Daniel was killed, he sat on every time I'd sit down, jumped right up on my lap. And before that, he had never been on anyone's lap at all. He wouldn't let anyone pick him up. He was from somewhere else and he chose us but on his terms. But
Hmm.
boy, they know so much. Those animals, they are special gifts to us from God. And
They
yeah,
really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think animals teach us more about being human than anything. I really, really, truly believe that.
Yeah, they've got that goodness, that love is just so deep in them, that it's somewhere in our hearts, right? Some folks are better at it than others, but they, like you had talked about, how unconditional they show their love. That's what God asks us to do, and
Mm.
it's absolutely, the love, that comes first, and it seems like they somehow get that. It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's what I think why trauma is such an important topic of discussion is because trauma disconnects us from the essence of who we are. And I really do believe that we are all pure love in essence. And, trauma dysregulates and disrupts and disconnects. And we spend our lives, searching and seeking for, some remedy or for healing or what have you. We're seeking for that reconnection. And what's interesting is I think that being out in nature, aside from prayer, like being out in nature is the closest to God that we can get, being down here.
Agree.
Because, when I've had dogs come to me for training for behavior rehabilitation, it's so beautiful and so amazing to watch them just completely shed whatever might be weighing on them. You see a completely different dog when you take them on a hike and when they're out in nature. Their nose reactivates and they just
Hmm.
It's such a beautiful thing. And that's even one of my favorite things to do when I was life coaching, when I was meeting with clients, is to go on a hike and have, instead of sitting in a room, you know, face to face or across the table from each other and asking questions and taking notes and having a conversation and all that. I think that you get some of the most authentic conversation when you're out on a hike together or out in nature together, going on a walk together and having a conversation. People tend to open up a little bit more, especially when the focus isn't directly on them. It's a really nice way to to have a
Yeah, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's perfect. I get that 110%. Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
A case regarding psychology.
Well, Sarah, thanks for having
Kimberly.
us on the platform today on The Power of Our Story. This is a fantastic platform, and there's just so much goodness that comes from all the folks that we bring on here. And so thank you so much for your time today, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank all of you. Thank all of
Yeah,
you. It really truly was a pleasure to meet you all and hear about some of your stories and just connect with you all. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It's a
absolutely.
wonderful platform.
Yeah.
Thank you.